In the year 1936, 10 days of Kazakh art and literature took place in Moscow. A troupe of young artists arrived in the USSR capital from Almaty by train. Among them, Kulyash and Kanabek Bayseitovs, Shara Zhinkulova, Kurmanbek Zhandarbekov, Evgeny Brusilovsky, Zhumar Shanin, and others. Temirbek Zhurgenov, People's Commissar of Education, is at the head of the Kazakh delegation. It was he who came up with the idea of staging the national opera Qazakh.
The
performance was a real sensation. The national style of the decorations, the unique orchestra of folk instruments, and of course, the amazing performance of Kazakh artists enthralled the sophisticated Moscow audience. Stalin himself attended the premiere at the Bolshoi Theater and gave a standing ovation. The next day, all Soviet newspapers exploded with enthusiastic reviews, and the troupe, at the personal invitation of Joseph Stalin, arrived at a private banquet in St. George's Hall in Kremlin. Attendees gave speeches and congratulated the performers. The contribution of the head, Temirbek Zhurgenov, was especially noted. He was awarded the Order of the Red Banner of Labor. But a year later, he will be shot in the dungeons of the NKVD as a traitor and a counter-revolutionary.
Top secret. To the Secretary of the Central Committee, Comrade Stalin, I am sending you the interrogation protocol of Turar Ryskulov, the head of the Pan-Turkist Counter-Revolutionary Organization, dated July 3, 1937. People's Commissar of Internal Affairs of the USSR, Commissar of State Security Nikolai Yezhov. Temirbek Zhurgenov, who at the time worked in Uzbekistan's People Commissariat for Education, played a prominent role in these uprisings. Zhurgenov comes from a very rich and important family of Karakum and Kazalkum steppes. All this was used to raise uprising. Zhurgenov's father and brothers led the uprising. The uprising in the Fergana Valley was raised using almost the same means, using the former minister of the Kokand government, Nasirkhan Toure.
He indeed came from a rich and noble family. Temirbek's father, Kara Zhurgenov, was a large cattle breeder, had countless herds of cattle, and sought to give a good education to all his children.
Temirbek Zhurgenov represents a very noble and rich Kazakh tribe from the Sырдарья River region. His father, Kara, was a Volost governor in pre-revolutionary Kazakhstan. Temirbek's childhood coincided with the end of the construction of the Turkestan-Siberia Railway. Which connected the cities of Tashkent and Orenburg. The entire railway is situated in the north of Uzbekistan. Going through modern-day Kazakhstan's Turkestan, Kızılorda and Aktobe regions, it reaches Orenburg. After the railway construction completion, local Russian Kazakh schools, vocational schools, technical schools, hospitals and other social institutions started opening everywhere.
From the age of 6, Temirbek and his brothers learned to read and write from their teacher Turmagambet Istlevov, a poet, translator, and connoisseur of Oriental poetry who spoke several languages. Temirbek's abilities manifested themselves at a fairly early age. He was a very purposeful and versatile kid with excellent organizational skills. He was thirsty for knowledge, he wanted to study, which is why he later entered the Ufa Land Surveying School and then the university preparatory courses in Orenburg. After graduating with honors, he went to the Central Asian State University in Tashkent. Surprisingly, while being a student at this university, he simultaneously becomes the rector of the first Kazakh pedagogical university in Tashkent and an official representative of the Kazakh ASSR in Uzbekistan. Few people know that Temirbek Zhurgenov played a huge role in maintaining the territorial integrity of our country. At the time, the Soviets started the process of delimitation, and the issue of establishing the borders of Central Asia and Kazakhstan was very acute. Back in 1924, Temirbek began to write his thesis on this topic and proved scientifically that the territories of Zhetasu and Sirdarya rivers historically belonged to Kazakhstan.
This is when, after the territorial delimitation, today's Zhetasu, Almaty, Jambul, Turkestan and Kızılar'da regions became part of the Kazakh Autonomous Soviet Socialistic Republic. It even included Karakalpakstan, which today is a part of Uzbekistan. So the young Zhurgenov made an invaluable contribution to the definition of the state border of Kazakhstan even then.
In Tashkent, Temirbek Zhurgenov met the first and only love of his life, Demitken Yermekova, the sister of one of the Alash movement leaders, Alimkhan Yermekov. This is evidence that despite the division among the Kazakh intelligentsia, they were not enemies because they had a common goal, the well-being of the Kazakh people. Temirbek and Demitken met by chance, at the same table at an event. They liked each other right away. This is how Demitken Zhurgenova recalled their courtship during her lifetime. This is a unique, miraculously preserved video. He spent the whole evening with me, and he left an impression of a pleasant, polite, and well-read person. He later was looking to meet with me. Sometimes he came to my university when the evening classes ended and walked me home. Sometimes he invited me to the theater or the cinema, but I was afraid, so I didn't go. But sometimes he invited me to debates and lectures of his professors at the university. This is where I did go, because these lectures are very interesting, instructive, enriching even. I went with pleasure. And at every meeting, Temirbek talked about professors, about university life. And most importantly, he spoke with enthusiasm about the new life, about current politics, and even said that we must now build socialism in 1/6 of the planet. He impressed her with his strength of character, openness, and wits. He was a true performer, an innovator who confidently looked into the future. He was strong and sincere in everything. She felt easy and calm next to him. He was her rock, constantly protecting her from any misfortunes. They had a close spiritual connection that even when she left for another city, he sent her multiple letters a day. It turned out he wrote 3 letters a day. In 3 days, he wrote 9 to 10 letters, in each of them expressing his sincere and deep feelings for me since the first day he met me. At the same time, he wrote that while I was there, he did not dare to speak about his feelings. But after I returned to Tashkent, he started expressing his feelings with even more energy and without hiding. He even dared to propose to me, but I answered to his proposal, "You know, Temirbek, I don't know you and I don't know what kind of person you are either." He answered, "I can court you for 10 years and not show my bad qualities, but as soon as we get married, you will instantly see what kind of a person I am." I thought about it and agreed. This marriage was a very happy one. Soon, the couple had a son, Shoratai. Temirbek Zhurgenov's career took off. In 1929, he was appointed People's Commissar of Finance of the Tajik ASSR, and in 1930, People's Commissar of Education of the Uzbek ASSR. Starting 1933, Zhurgenov was working in his homeland, in Kazakhstan, having taken the post of People's Commissar of Education.
Нарком просвещения тогда охватывал деятельность сегодняшнего Министерства культуры.
The People's Commissar of Education then covered the activities of today's Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Higher Education, Ministry of Science. We had a Ministry of Science and Technology at one time. It was also responsible for religious affairs, for ethnicity affairs, and many other issues. The People's Commissar of Education was overseeing archives, publishing houses, mass media, and so on. The first People's Commissar of Education in Kazakhstan was the great Ahmet Baytursunullah. Therefore, when taking this position, having already a solid experience, Zhurgenov did a lot in making of Kazakhstan's culture and educational system, which were then just going through the stage of formation.
И образовательной системы, и системы культуры. Тогда она только-только проходила этап становления.
Zhurgenov became a part of the bureau of the regional party committee. He was given complete control of the headquarters of the Cultural Revolution. This Cultural Revolution was supposed to take place in this exhausted, bloodless, weakened country at the time of national catastrophe, so he hit the ground running. He started with schools. At the time, Filip Galashukin was the first secretary of the Kazakh Regional Committee of the Communist Party, who also introduced policies fighting against illiteracy. The question of national education was also on the table, but the execution was far from over. No one set any big goals except for Zhurgenov. He set a goal of not only eliminating illiteracy, but of introducing universal secondary education. They merged schools, reinforced their curricula, built new schools. He sought the allocation of new funds and managed in a short time to increase the amount of funds allocated per each student threefold.
Under his leadership, a cultural and educational revolution took place in our country. Hundreds of teachers were trained. Tens of thousands of textbooks were written and printed. Millions of people rushed to schools and got an education. Temirbek worked hard. He was obsessed with the idea of raising his people to a new level, so that everyone, from young to old, would have access to education and books, regardless of their financial status and location. That was a difficult time for the country that had not yet recovered from the civil war, from the terrible famine. Bringing people to libraries, museums, theaters was not an easy task. But People's Commissar Zhurgenov believed that only education and art could become a healing force that could fill people's heart with hope and faith in the future.
Temirbek Zhurgenov'тың енді бізге үлгі боларлық дүниесі өте.
Temirbek Zhurgenov and his life path is a great example for the younger generation of artists.
Қазіргі тілмен айтсақ, министр болғандығы. Қаржы министр болды Тәжікстанда, Өзбекстанда ағартушы жолында министр болды. Одан Қазақстанға келіп, бұл енді білмеймін, ондай.
An example of how one should live, serve one's profession, one's people, one's country.
Және қазақ елінің сол бір қиын кездегі.
He happened to live in a difficult time when the country was trying to survive, but he still thought that the future belongs to art and education.
Керемет сол кездің рухани байлығының.
Back in the 1930s, at the 10 Days of Kazakh Culture in Moscow, he showed everyone, the entire Soviet Union, Russia, what Kazakh art can be like.
Басқарып тұрған уақытында мектептердің саны.
He set a bar for others. He laid the foundations of culture and education. Just look at how many universities he built, how many schools. His contribution is invaluable.
In
Almaty alone, Zhurgenov built 18 schools in 3 years. He personally supervised the construction of each facility by visiting them. Under his leadership, Almaty universities, which became the flagships of higher education in Kazakhstan, were built. This is Satpayev Technical University. This is Asfendiyarov Kazakh National Medical University. This is Abay Kazakh National Pedagogical University. And of course, Al-Farabi Kazakh National University.
From the memoirs of Kurmanbek Zhandarbekov. Temirbek Zhurgenov worked his fingers to the bone to let Kazakh art spread its wings. We know him as the father of the Kazakh theater.
Indeed, under Zhurgenov's leadership, Kazakh art, namely opera, ballet, theater, fine art, spread its wings and rose to new heights. It was Zhurgenov who came up with the idea of creating the legendary Kozhebek opera. He was also a collector of Kazakh folklore. He supported talented people all his life, created the conditions for their development. It was Zhurgenov who sent the artist Abulkhan Kosteyev to study in Moscow, where he was able to nurture his talent, turning into a renowned artist. It was Zhurgenov who helped Kyushu composer Dina Nurpiyisova solve the housing problem. He took under his wing dancer Shara Zhyenkulova and her husband, opera singer Kurmanbek Zhandarbekov, whom party functionaries wanted to expel from Kazakhstan as descendants of bais, aka bourgeoisie representatives. An interview with Shara Zhyenkulova was preserved in the archives, where she talks about the iconic meeting with Temirbek Zhurgenov.
И вдруг приезжает единственная легковая машина в Алмате, черная МК тогда называется.
Suddenly, the only passenger car in the whole of Almaty. Anytime it would drive by our street, the children would run after it. They were very interested. So this car drives up to our house. We lived in a small house. And the driver says, "People's Commissar Zhurgenov is awaiting you. I am his assistant. I came to take you to him." Zhandarbek says, "Thank you, but it's too late. We're leaving Kazakhstan." But he began persuading us, "This is the People's Commissar. You have to go. Please get in the car." So we got in the car and drove away. We were received by a handsome, powerful, intelligent Kazakh with black curly hair and beautiful eyes. There were 4 of us, Kulash Baisiitova, her husband, Zhandarbek, and me. And so he says, "I invited you here to get acquainted. I am Temirbek Zhurgenov, People's Commissar of Education. The 4 of you are the founders of the Kazakh opera. You don't know what opera is, I'll explain it to you. We will create a musical theater and then we will move to the opera house." Then Kurmanbek got up and said that we were fired and expelled from the Communist Party, so we will leave. What? How? He was furious. "Not on my watch. The 4 of you will be the founders of the Kazakh opera. You will be a director and a singer," he said to Zhandarbek. "Baisitovs will be the singers, and Shara will be a dancer."
Исключили из партии. Мы уедем. Кто, как, он так, знаете, возмущался, говорит, никаких. Вот и все 4 основоположники оперного театра. Ты будешь режиссером, певцом Зhandarбеком, Baisitov, ты будешь певцом, Куляч певицей, а Шара танцовщицей.
Шара Зhyenkulova с лихвой оправдала...
Shara Zhyenkulova lived up to the expectations. She studied choreography professionally, performed on the stage of theater and in the cinema, and then became the founder of the folk dance department in the first choreographic school in Kazakhstan, of which she later became the director.
Что я хочу сказать? Это Зhurgenov, вы извините, я буду Темкой называть. Мы все...
What I want to say, this Zhurgenov, if you'll excuse me, I will call him Timka. We all called him Timka out of respect. He said and he did. I've been living for a long time. I've seen the change in leadership so many times, but I have never seen again that incandescence of Zhurgenov, his energy, the way he said there will be an opera house tomorrow.
В один из вечеров, обычно бывает, что редко.
One evening, we went out for a walk, which usually happened rarely. And then we got to the Kalinin Street. He stopped and said, "I don't remember now what was on this place. It was either some square or an empty place." He stopped and said, "This is where we will build an opera house." I laughed and said, "You want to make this all happen so quickly?" And he replied, "Since we already have a theater, but no building, we need to build it as soon as possible." And just like that, probably several months later, the foundation was laid at this location indicated by Zhurgenov.
Прошло, наверное, несколько месяцев. На этом указанном Жургеневом месте был заложен фундамент.
That was a special time in the life of the country, a time of hopes and discoveries, a happy time in the life of Temirbek Zhurgenov. He was young, full of strength, energy and desire to create. Beloved wife and son were at his side. But suddenly, baby Shoratai fell ill and died. For Temirbek and Demetken, this became a terrible shock. Their house was empty, and in order to survive this loss and calm their hearts, they decided to adopt a child. They took Temirbek's nephew, Jumanazar. In 1936, preparations for the 10 days of Kazakh art and literature in Moscow began. Zhurgenov plunged headlong into work. Rehearsals were held daily, and he was personally present at each. He himself listened and watched the performances, participated in everything. The task was not to just perform in Moscow, but to make a splash.
From chairperson of Kazakhstan's Union of Writers, Gabbas Tokzhanov, to People's Commissar of Education, Temirbek Zhurgenov, and the Board of Kazakhstan's Writers Union, Moscow attaches great importance to the 10 days of Kazakh culture. Apparently, the experience of Ukraine is taken into account. Now our task is to prepare for the 10 days of culture in such a way that will show, both through our theatrical art and literature, the main achievements of Kazakh art and that it is worthy of the attention of the entire Soviet audience. There is potential, it all depends on us. In addition to 2 productions, Qazakh and Zhalbur, 2 big concerts will take place, one at the Bolshoi Theatre and the other in the Park of Culture and Leisure. We need to bring to this concert all the best talents of Kazakh art. Music theatre, philharmonic, drama theatre, and so on.
They managed to gather 300 people from all over Kazakhstan. A lot of them were children of shepherds, collective farmers, and so on. Zhurgenov took these 300 illiterate people and brought them together. He created the Kurmangazi Orchestra. He found the famous folk singer Zhambul Zhabayev and composer Dina Nurpiisova from the town of Guryev and assembled a large team. He immediately found a place for a ballet studio. As he used to say, there is no opera theater without the ballet. People studied, prepared for the event, and worked on the program and organization at the same time. Within 3 months, they prepared 3 productions, Ayman Sholpan, Shoga, Zhalbur, and a huge 2-part concert. We used to joke then that we were in prison. We were preparing in the building of the modern-day Uyghur Korean Theater, which then was the building of the Internal Affairs Ministry. We practically lived there. While the orchestra was playing, the dancers were resting. While the dancers were preparing, the singers were resting, a sort of an assembly line. His schedule was full. If he heard someone being off-key, he would stop the music and point it out.
Танцовщицы отдыхают. Пока танцовщицы там танцуют, певцы отдыхают вот таким конвейером, это все его думал о его расписании. Какой-нибудь фальш музыки в оркестре он говорит, останавливал. Вот здесь не так. Будьте добры, исправьтесь.
The program prepared by the Kazakh Republic exceeded all expectations. The decorations in the Bolshoi Theater, in the form of a huge adorned yurt with utensils, carpets and furs, amazed the audience, as well as the orchestra of folk instruments led by Ahmed Zhubanov, the skill of the musicians, characteristic nightingale-like vocals, amazing grace and plasticity. The next morning, Gulash Baysitova, Shara Zhiinkulova, Kurmanbek Zhandarbekov, Khanabek Basyitov woke up celebrities of the entire Soviet Union. All the newspapers wrote about their exceptional talent and deep impression the Kazakh art had on the sophisticated Moscow audience.
May 20th, 1936, Izvestia newspaper. The Kazakhs brought such art that is close and understandable not only to the Kazakh people, but to everyone. The Kazakhs managed to elevate their music, retaining all its national features, especially their manner of singing with an open sound. One can only regret that for our historians who sometimes perceive and glorify the ultra-fashionable Western musical tricks too recklessly, the art of the Soviet peoples still, in essence, remains a well-kept secret. Notably for many of our art historians, the performances of the Kazakh theater turned out to be a sensational discovery. which still needs to be studied, determined, and investigated.
Вот они удивились, и приятно удивились. Это удивление как
They were pleasantly surprised, and this amazement served us well at the end of the year, when the extraordinary 8th All-Union Congress of Soviets took place, where they adopted a new constitution, the second constitution of the Soviet Union, the so-called Stalinist constitution. And so this constitution listed the Kazakh Soviet Republic separately. Previously it was the autonomy within Russia, but now it was separated from it. It was put on an equal footing with Russia. It was a huge success. Kazakhstan managed to show the role of socialism. They used to say, look at how backward Kazakhs managed to improve their standing. The performance at the 10 days of Kazakh culture gave authorities a reason to make us a union republic. Thanks to Zhurgenov's successful work and leadership of the Cultural Revolution, the Kazakh people received a higher status, and the country managed to become a Soviet republic. Thanks to this, in 1936 we became a Soviet republic, and later in 1991 were able to declare independence. If it were not for this, then just like other autonomous republics within Russia, we could have remained a part of it and would still not have our independence, for sure. In this respect, the role of Zhurgenov should be especially emphasized. I believe that he is the forerunner of our independence.
необходимо подчеркнуть. Мне кажется, он флагман, знаменосец нашей независимости.
Сталин с большим опасением относился.
Stalin was wary of many prominent Kazakh figures. He often changed their positions. At some point, he invited Turar Ryskulov to Moscow to become deputy chair of the USSR Council of People's Commissars, which is like a vice prime minister today. He was overseeing the entirety of Central Asia. Stalin knew Ali Khan Bokay Khan. He considered Mustafa Shokai his sworn enemy. Shokai was the leader of not only emigrated Kazakhs, but of all Turkic, Central Asian peoples. A special criminal case was opened against him. Several assassination attempts were organized while he was abroad, so Stalin treated all Kazakhs with suspicion. And until 1936, despite the fact that the Kazakhs were the largest ethnic group in Central Asia, he did not give them the status of the Soviet Republic for a long time. Only after Turkmenistan, the population of which is 3-4 times smaller compared to Kazakhs, became the Soviet Republic, when Tajikistan became the Soviet Republic, only after all of this, he finally gives the Kazakhs the status of the Soviet Republic. It was in 1936. And of course, I think that the 10 days of Kazakh culture also played a part in this, to a certain extent. That brilliant performance, the powerful intellectual potential of the Kazakhs, the richest culture of the Kazakhs, which was demonstrated during the event.
Богатейшая культура казахов, которая была продемонстрирована во время декады.
Of course, the credit for the success of the 10 days of Kazakh art and literature in Moscow goes not to Temirbek Zhurgenov alone. Almost all famous and talented people of that time, Saken Seyfulin, Beimbet Maylin, Zhumat Shanin, Ilyas Zhansugurov and others took part in the preparation of the tour. Each of them contributed to the development and formation of our culture. And all these wonderful people, including Temirbek Zhurgenov, were arrested practically at the same time in August 1937. The Great Terror began. The Politburo of the USSR Central Committee adopted a decree on anti-Soviet elements on July 2, 1937. It was addressed to the secretaries of district, provincial and regional committees of all Soviet republics. It stated, the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks asks to submit within 5 days the number of those to be shot, as well as the number of those to be deported. This document initiated the Great Stalinist Terror. The decision to execute was carried out by the Court of Three, which included a representative of the NKVD, the party, and the prosecutor's office. Throughout the country, these courts of three carried out this mass, planned operation against the Soviet people. The operation was approved by Politburo Resolution number 00447, which stated,
Politburo resolution approving NKVD order number 00447 Approve the draft operational order submitted by the NKVD on the repression of former bourgeois, criminals and anti-Soviet elements. Begin the operation in all regions of the Soviet Union on August the 5th, 1937. Allocate the NKVD 75 million rubles for costs associated with the operation.
То есть Сталин и большевики выделили...
That is, Stalin and the Bolsheviks allocated a whopping 75 million rubles for mass terror. The same decree details how many people should be shot and how many should be sent to camps. The figures are broken down by regions, according to their population. All figures are round, which means that they were not based on any real intelligence. So you can imagine how they fabricated cases against our intelligentsia. Temirbek Zhurgenov remembered this day to the tiniest detail. The day they took Temirbek. The day that split her life into before and after.
День, который разделил ее жизнь на до и после.
Его арестовали днем 2 августа.
He was arrested on the afternoon of August 2nd. Temirbek was supposed to go to either a plenum or a conference, I don't remember now. We were in a car, him, me, and my mother. He said, I need to pop in at the People's Commissariat of Education. I need my materials, I'm a speaker after all. So he goes in and, after a while, suddenly a young, very unpleasant man comes up to us and says, Zhurgenov is calling you. He takes me to a hall where I wait for Temirbek. I wait for 2 to 3 minutes. I wait for 5. Then the doors open and I see his assistant passing by. I say, where is Zhurgenov? And he replies, he just left. I was confused. How could he leave if he just called me? At that moment, I felt that something was wrong. I just couldn't wait. I even broke my heel coming down the stairs. I came to our car. My mother was sitting there and she said, you know, just now, 2 men took Temirbek from both sides and put him in some other car. He was looking for you. He was looking for you for so long. He didn't say anything. He just kept looking for you the whole time. Apparently, this is how they took him.
Только смотрел. Он ничего не говорил, но смотрел на твою сторону. И, видимо, так и увезли его.
They were taken one by one. Against the backdrop of quite recent success in Moscow, after applause and high awards, it was a shock for everyone. Arrest warrants were issued by Chief Prosecutor Andrei Vyshinsky.
The game has been exposed. The mask has been ripped off their faces once and for all. Let the sentence roar as the all-cleansing thunder of the righteous Soviet punishment.
Vyshinsky loved to speak in public. He spoke loudly and convincingly. He branded and demanded reprisals. The audience usually rejoiced and applauded. A new wave of arrests began after such speeches. The period from persecution to sentencing and the death penalty was very short, sometimes just a few days.
I ask for your instruction to execute the sentences passed by the visiting session of the Military Collegium of the USSR Supreme Court dated February 26, 1938, in relation to those convicted to capital punishment, shooting.
Judging by the interrogation protocols, the charges brought against the arrested representatives of the Kazakh intelligentsia were almost identical: nationalism and espionage for Japan. Temirbek Zhurgenov was also accused of organizing the Karakum uprising that took place in 1930, training people for terrorist acts, creating a commando unit, and organizing arson of the Kazakh State University in Almaty. Shahzada Shonanova was also accused of that arson. She was the first and only Kazakh woman shot during the repressions.
Постановление ЦК от 1938 года написано.
The 1938 decree of the Central Committee states that the NKVD officers lost their edge and forgot how to conduct proper investigations, which is why all sentences were passed based on confessions made during beatings. They did not care for these confessions to be supported by at least some evidence. The repression campaign did not meet the 4-month deadline. Leadership of the republics sent telegrams to the Kremlin requesting an increase of the number of those to be shot. Secretary of Kazakhstan's Central Committee, Levon Mirzayan, wrote, "Since the set for us limit of 2,500 people to be shot turned out to be extremely insufficient, I request permission to shoot by means of the courts of 3 an additional 3,500 people." This encryption was sent on December 2, 1937, and most likely that, as a result of this particular request, a whole group of outstanding people was destroyed. Temirbek Zhurgenov and his associates were shot on the same day, according to the documents, on February 25, 1938.
Очень нелепые были обвинения.
These were ridiculous accusations. Many Kazakhs who had never seen the Japanese in their lives were accused of spying for Japan. As for Central Asia, many were accused of being connected with the Basmachi movement. Through Turkish emissaries, they were connected with British intelligence. They made up a whole array of ridiculous accusations. I think that Temirbek Zhurgenov believed in the revolution with his heart. He was a young man at the time. He was 17. At the age of 18, he joins the political struggle, just like the rest of his peers, like Gani Muratbayev. They wholeheartedly accepted the Soviet regime and honestly served the communist idea, unlike the representatives of the Alash movement. But the accusations were incredibly ridiculous. If Sakensi Fulin, the Red Falcon, was accused, what could be said about young Zhurgenov? Especially considering that he worked in the Fergana Valley, he worked in Tajikistan, he worked in Uzbekistan, and at the time this region resisted the Sovietization of Central Asia a lot.
Он работал в Таджикистане, он работал в Узбекистане. А в это время это было регионом огромного сопротивления советизации Центральной Азии.
The relatives did not know anything about Temirbek's fate. The next day, the wife Demitken and her adopted son were evicted from their apartment. She sent the boy to the village to his relatives, and herself rented a small room. All she wanted was a short date with her husband, but she never got that chance. Later, Demitken was fired from her job and expelled from the party. In February 1938, a neighbor showed her a newspaper where in the list of executed enemies of the people, she found her husband's last name. A month later, they came for Demitken herself. As the wife of the traitor to the motherland, she, along with other wives, was convicted and sent to a specialized camp, the notorious Algiers. Temirbek Zhurgenov's father and brothers were also convicted and sentenced to death.
An old man who was 81 years old, they took him and shot him in 1937. His son was shot in 1938, and he was shot on September the 3rd, 1937. They took him from Kızılorda to Shymkent, which was the regional center at the time, and shot him there. They also shot the 2 of his sons, who participated in the protest movement in 1930. They were part of the Zhangeldin Commission, who went to negotiate with the Bolsheviks. This was the time Philip Goloshokin was in power. They seemed to have agreed. Zhangeldin and other writers next to him were convinced that there was no need to resist, that things can be fixed. The Soviet government promises you. They trusted that promise and laid down their arms. But after they left, the Bolsheviks took everyone from their homes and basically finished them off. This trait of promising one thing and doing the opposite was inherent in the Soviet rule.
Zhurgenov's adopted son Zhumanazar volunteered for the front, having barely reached the age of 18. He bravely fought and died, just like many other children of the persecuted, who wanted to wash away with their own blood the dirt and lies with which the Soviet government sullied the names of their fathers. The place where Zhumanazar was buried is still unknown. Demitken Zhurgenova, having gotten out, devoted the rest of her life to restoring the honorable name of her husband, Temirbek Zhurgenov.
Дамеш Амирхановна сама после
Temirbek Zhurgenov, after the execution of Temirbek Zhurgenov, roamed the cruelest Stalinist camps for 7 years, starting from Algiers, the Akmola camp of wives of traitors, to the motherland, to North Ural camp.
до Североллага. И сразу же освободившись после реабилитации,
Right after her release, after her rehabilitation, she began to write numerous letters to authorities about her husband's loyalty, his honest service to the motherland, asking for his speedy rehabilitation. And she achieved her goal. As a result of these appeals, in 1957, Temirbek Zhurgenov was among the first to be rehabilitated, along with Sakyan Sifulin and other cultural figures.
наряду с Акеном Сейфуллиным и другими деятелями культуры был реабилитирован.
Долгие годы место захоронения Темирбека Жургенова
For many years, the burial site of Temirbek Zhurgenov and others persecuted by the regime was unknown. Only in 1980s, here, in this place, which the people call Kandasai, or the Bloody Ravine, a mass grave was discovered. It is believed that this is where the most talented and educated Kazakhs took their last breath. Because, in order to behead the nation, you need to deprive them of their intelligentsia. You need to deprive them of leaders, which is who Zhurgenov and his associates were. This monument is another reminder of the terrible period of Stalinist repressions that our people had to live through.
Take a moment of silence, all who come here. You will hear the groan of the ground that took in the ashes of its sons and daughters, who died in vain during the years of Stalinist terror and the Great Famine. Eternal memory to the dead.